defined civil rights and responsibilities. The Greeks, especially the Athenians, emphasized the humane, the dynamic, and the rational modes of life. Basically humanistic in temperament, the Greeks concentrated on earthly achievements rather than life after death, despite a fundamentally humanistic worldview. However, Greek culture bore some signs of Oriental influence. The Spartan caste. 14. System bore a slight resemblance to that of India. Athenian women lived in seclusion as did some of their Oriental counterparts. When it depicted the human form, archaic Greek sculpture tended to follow the Egyptian stance. Although Hellenic origins are obscure, Greek culture probably began at Knossos, on Crete, first spreading to the Aegean Islands, and then to the southern and central areas of the Peloponnesus. The Minoan civilization of Crete, flourishing from 2100 to 1400 BC, and known for its creative builders, engineers, and artists, undoubtedly influenced Greek cultural development. It was the Mycenaeans, speaking an Indo-European language, who migrated to and dominated Greece from 1400 BC until the Dorian invasions of 1200 BC. Mycenaean society was hierarchically organized, with landholding nobles at the top, warriors, courtiers, and merchants in the middle, and slaves at the bottom. By the 13th century, the legendary Agamemnon, leader of the famed expedition against Troy, was the acknowledged overlord of Mycenae. In the 8th century, the famous poet Homer recalled the Mycenaean siege of Troy in his epic work the Iliad and then told of Odysseus, or Ulysses, king of Ithaca, who wandered for a decade after the destruction of Troy before returning to his native land and his wife, Penelope. Homeric education, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, appearing about 850 BC, were the first significant literary works in Greek culture. Recounting the early episodes of Greek history, the Homeric epics embodied the wisdom and crystallized the traditions, beliefs, and values of the ancient Greek lifestyle. The Iliad and the Odyssey are among the early significant sources not only of classical Greek education but of Western education as well. They illustrate the power of education in its most general sense to transmit and thereby perpetuate the culture. In Homer's time, education took place informally by participation in the culture. Later on, the establishing of schools created a more formal but also a more limited educational experience. Homer's great poems served the educational purposes of 1. Conserving the culture by transmitting it from adults to the young, 2. Giving the Greeks a sense of cultural identity based upon their mythic and historical origins, 3. Shaping the character, the morality, of the young by exposing them to the heroic models conveyed by the epics, 4. Providing a context for the ongoing saga of Greek life and its extension into the future. Greek education 15. 16 Chapter 2. Educationally, Homer's poems were instruments of enculturation which introduced the young Greeks to the ethos, manners, and aspirations of their cultural group. Resembling the heroic literature of the Middle Ages, the Iliad and Odyssey told of heroic ancestors. Through the songs and stories of
Susan told me to go tell you, that's why.
Youths became familiar with those heroic exemplars or cultural models, after which they could pattern their own values. As significant poetical, aesthetic, historical, and pedagogical works, the Iliad and Odyssey told Greek generations of that moral climate in which heroes, by combining wisdom and action, sought and won glory. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which tell the story of the Greek war against Troy, recast the theme of an oral tradition, the telling of a story by a speaker to listeners, into written form. The Iliad's plot, interweaving themes of love and war and religion and politics, was about the reclaiming of Helen, the beautiful wife of a Greek king, Menelaus, who had been carried off by Paris, the prince of Troy. Menelaus was the brother of the greatest of the Greek kings, Agamemnon, who organized a Greek expeditionary force to regain the lost Helen and punish the Trojans. The Greek effort escalated into a decade-long struggle against the Trojans, frequently marred by rivalry among the Greek knights, especially Achilles, the greatest warrior, and Agamemnon, the principal king. Troy's defeat finally occurred when Greek soldiers, hidden in a giant wooden horse, entered Troy and opened the gates of the fortified city to their compatriots, enabling them to defeat their Trojan adversaries. Point 2. Mycenaean society, as represented by Agamemnon's court, was headed by the king, who was surrounded by a council of elders and knights and presided over a chivalric culture dominated by an aristocracy of warriors. Within the milieu of soldierly camaraderie, Homer's knights served their king as warriors and orators. The dominant events in courtly life were athletic contests and the preparation and actual waging of war. The young man who successfully imitated the ideal of the Homeric hero, as exemplified by Agamemnon, Ulysses, and Achilles, was the knight who behaved courteously in court, spoke elegantly and poetically, performed the warrior's arts of hunting, riding, and fencing, and observed the required religious proprieties and rituals. The young Greek noble learned the warrior's role, skills, and ethics by participating in courtly life and by hearing oral narratives rather than by attending formal educational institutions. By imitating heroic models, he was inducted into a life of courtesy, correct etiquette, and proper behavior. The Homeric hero was moved by a sense of duty to himself, his friends, his king, and his gods. As he pursued merit, or excellence, through all the varieties of human experience, this hero was buffeted by obstacles put in his path by a seemingly capricious and irresponsible fate. Designed to test his mettle, these trials were overcome by the man of truly heroic dimensions. Homer's stories, the Iliad and Odyssey, were also ethical lessons. When Homer told of the clash of Agamemnon and Achilles over a slave girl, he developed the theme of personal argument between two friends within the broader context of the Trojan War. Internal bickering among their leaders jeopardized the Greek cause. Since this animosity threatened the well-being of their compatriots, Homer made the point that individuals were often required to sacrifice personal interests for the common good. Ulysses, as an example of the hero, personified the Homeric ethic by combining wisdom and action. Although motivated by the hero's quest for glory and honor, Ulysses was not foolhardy but exercised discretion and cunning to extricate himself from awkward and dangerous situations. Often by retreating at strategic times, Homer's heroes lived to fight another day. The educational significance of Homer's epic portrayals of the Greek struggle against Troy lies in three dimensions: 1. As a movement from an oral to a written educational tradition; 2. In using modeling for moral education; and 3. In illuminating the universal issues that characterized later Greek philosophizing about education. In the Western as well as the Greek educational experience, the transition from an oral to a written tradition that Homer's epics marked was a powerful event. Before writing, the oral tradition of narratives recited by bards stirred the mystic chords of communal memory as the cultural heritage was passed from old to young. It may have been that Homer, one of these bards, by recording the poems around 750 BC, changed the oral to a written tradition. By doing so, Homer enlarged the audience for the poetry both in time and in space. This made the epic poems into great fountainheads of the Western, as well as the Greek, educational heritage. Homer, too, was a pioneering figure in moral education. His poems provided heroic models who embodied the preferred virtues of the culture and compelling drama that would encourage the young to eagerly embrace both the hero and the values he represented. Thus, the young were provided with a morally unambiguous cultural prototype. Homer made the hero into a model of personal and civic character so that the ideal good person. Greek Education 17. 18 Chapter 2 became inextricably intertwined with the good society, or polis, a theme that Plato and Aristotle would later develop. The Iliad's underlying themes generated many universal philosophical issues that Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Isocrates would probe in later years. The plot of the poem tells the reader that the actions of characters have consequences that affect not only them but those who depend upon them. What stands out is that cause and effect are connected in the ongoing lives of people as history unfolds. As Goldman writes, God. Homer's work is pervaded by an underlying thirst for universal order and lawfulness, by a comprehensive vision of all things, great and small, fitting into a harmonious pattern which has grown out of the past and which needs to be continued into the future. Point 3. Even after the passing of the Greek feudal age, the Homeric virtues, associated with an aristocratic fighting and ruling elite, continued to influence Greek cultural and educational developments. Foremost among Homer's values was the ethical principle that held that a person, to be truly human, was to participate fully in the polis, or community. Even when it became more formal and literary, Greek education was devoted to Homeric epic poetry, which portrayed life's heroic dimension and inculcated an ideal of glory. Invasion and colonization. From 1200 to 1050 BC, the cultivated Greek kingdoms such as Mycenae were overrun by the more primitive Greek tribes, the Dorians, who entered the peninsula from the Balkans. The Dorian invasions ushered in the so-called Dark Ages, which saw the fabled city-states of Homer's epics reduced to isolated and unprosperous petty states. Although it took more than 2 centuries to recover from the Dorian invasions, the Greek city-states were prosperous enough, by 800 BC, to begin to send forth colonizing expeditions. From 800 until 550 BC, Greek colonists extended Hellenic culture throughout the Aegean, from the Peloponnesus to the Ionic Islands, to Sicily, and even to southern Italy. Spurred on by such varying motives as overpopulation, political and social unrest, and economic adventurism, colonization was a safety valve for the land-hungry Greeks. Although living space was often their first objective, the colonists soon developed prosperous commercial and trading centers. Greek colonies were not mere extensions or dependencies of the mother city but rather independent foundations, which went their own political way. The period of colonization had two major effects on Greek civilization. 1. It led to conflict with Persia. 2. Increased wealth and the rise of commercial classes produced significant social changes. For educational historians, the latter effect had greater consequence. The nouveau riches, or rising commercial classes, acquired sufficient economic power to challenge the privileged political position of the older landed aristocrats. The first professional educators, the sophists, appeared to satisfy the educational needs of these rising classes by preparing them for political leadership. The rise of the sophists and the Platonic reaction against them is treated in Chapter 3. In 550 BC, the Persians conquered Ionia, one of the Greek colonies. 50 years later the Ionian Greeks revolted in sympathy with the struggle of their Ionian kinsmen. The Greek city-states joined in temporary alliance against the Persians. In 490, Darius, the Persian emperor, sent a small expeditionary force to take punitive action against Athens, which had aided the Ionian rebels. The Athenian army defeated the Persian invaders at the Battle of Marathon. In 480, Darius' heir, Xerxes, assembled a large army and fleet to crush the Greeks. Again the Greeks combined against the Persian invaders. The Athenian navy defeated and destroyed the Persian fleet at Salamis in 480. The united Greek forces, led by the Spartans, crushed the Persian army at Plataea in 479 to end the Persian threat. Although they had succeeded against the common Persian enemy, the unity of the Greek city-states was only temporary. The Athenians organized an alliance of city-states, the Delian Confederation, which soon became the Athenian Empire, and the Spartans organized a counterforce, the Peloponnesian League. Hostility between these rival alliances eventually led to open warfare and the weakening of Hellenic civilization. Before describing the rival states, Athens and Sparta, certain common features of Greek civilization and education will be examined. Greek cultural patterns. Although Greek culture and society have long been identified as marking the point of departure for studying Western civilization and education, it should be pointed out that the Greeks were slave owners and that slavery was unquestioned in ancient Greece. The society rested, at least partially, on a slave labor force. The slave population, existing in the various city-states, were regarded as property by their owners. The vast majority of slaves, including Greek education 1920 Chapter 2, women and children, were often defeated in war. Other sources of slaves were the children of slaves or those judicially condemned to slavery. The condition of slavery held important educational implications. Although there were educated slaves who tutored wealthy children, the majority of slaves were trained to perform specific productive tasks in agriculture or trade. The Greeks, in their educational theories and practices, distinguished between general or liberal education suited for the free man and the training appropriate for slaves. While a small minority of exceptional women attained education and status, Greek society was male-dominated. With the exception of the Spartan women who were given some physical education, women, particularly in Athens, did not attend school. Those women who were educated were instructed by tutors or parents. Since Greek education was highly gender-specific, the majority of women were undereducated. Greek religion was a polytheistic fusion of two kinds of religious experience, one relating to nature and the other to the social group. The Greeks deified external natural forces, such as climate and weather, and constructed an elaborate mythology to explain the universe. The various gods were not conceived of as remote supernatural beings but were rather superhuman projections of forces and objects in nature. Giving vent to their dramatic and plastic sense, the Greeks endowed their gods with human forms and inclinations. The Greek desire for unity and logic was exhibited in the creation of a theological Olympiad presided over by Zeus, the father of both gods and human beings. The social element in Greek religion was as strong as the natural one. While doctrinal theology was minimized, formal rituals which integrated social and religious experiences were evident. Greek religious interpretations of sociological phenomena were decidedly humanistic and not based on the conception of a supernatural afterlife. The religious rituals, holidays, and festivals heightened and illuminated the events of political and social life. Everyday pursuits and occupations were regulated closely by the deities, who were believed to have jurisdiction over individual and group affairs. Religious mythology and ritual performed educational roles when the young Greek, through participation in public festivals and ceremonies, was introduced to civic loyalties and responsibilities. Performed at festivals and civic events, Greek drama combined civic splendor with religious ritual to touch the deepest centers of personal and corporate consciousness. The philosopher Aristotle asserted that tragedy effected a catharsis in the spectator by purging emotions through pity and terror. Since performances were major public affairs, the dramas were approved by a selection committee for performance at certain annual festivals. The acceptance of a play gave great distinction to its author. In the 5th century BC, Greek drama reached its height when the works of such playwrights as Aeschylus, 525 to 456, Sophocles, c. 495 c. 406, and Euripides, c. 4 BOC. 406, were publicly acclaimed. The aesthetic skills of these famous dramatists rested on their powers of using narration and impersonation. By employing ritualistic expression, they interpreted for their audiences the workings of natural forces and the rhythms of birth, life, and death. The chorus, functioning as a corporate actor and commentator, combined song and dance in a manner that reflected the religious and ritualistic origins of the dramatic festivals. Since they dealt with familiar themes from the legendary or heroic past, Greek tragedies integrated the past with the present and the future. Since the audience already knew the major events of the story, the dramatist could move swiftly to the particular situation chosen to develop the theme. The central figure was a person of heroic proportions who was also a tragic figure, tried by fate and found wanting because of some character flaw. This impediment to perfection, or tragic flaw, prevented the hero from achieving that integration, harmony, and balance so much desired as part of the Greek way of life. Greek theater reflected the experiences and values of the culture from which it drew sustenance and support. By crystallizing the major events of the Greek experience in dramatic form, it was a major agency of informal education. The authors of award-winning tragedies were publicly acclaimed, and their works were recognized as valuable aesthetic contributions to life. The young person who witnessed the dramas received an aesthetic education through the portrayal of the concerns and dilemmas of the human search for personal and social harmony. In some ways, Greek drama reflected the Hellenic belief in the existence of a universal design which explained even the most complex and fortuitous combinations of events. As humanists, the Greeks firmly believed that human reason was powerful enough to find and extract the meaning of existence and nature. Driven by their curiosity, Greek philosophers speculated about human nature and hoped to find the universal patterns that governed reality. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Isocrates, each in his own way, sought to discover universal truths and to make them known so that people might follow them and thereby live the good life. The Greek emphasis on design, order, and structure was also reflected in their language, which expressed with great accuracy the relationships between ideas and the fine shades of meaning and emotions. The Greek Education 21. 22 Chapter 2. Greeks regarded those who spoke their language as civilized while all non-Greek speaking people were considered barbarians. The emphasis on design, harmony, and balance in the universe had a personal implication for the Greek, whose art and philosophy exemplified the quest for merit, or excellence. Embracing all varieties of human excellence, Erit differed from the technical skill needed in performing a specialized activity. Erit expressed the mode of life of the person who had attained harmony and balance by exercising rationality and who pursued a mean of moderation between the excesses of extreme self-repression and extreme exhibition. Greek life focused in the polis, a community of shared religious, civic, economic, social, political, and aesthetic endeavor in which the individuals lived their personal and corporate life. The Greek emphasis on harmony and balance found expression in this institution, which had both private and public ramifications. The polis. The key to understanding Greek civilization was the polis, or city-state, an association of citizens designed to promote the common welfare and security. The city-states generally grew up at the base of a defensible high point, or acropolis, which became the community's religious, social, and political center. Politically, the polis was a sovereign and independent state, whose particular form of government varied from place to place. It might be a monarchy, a diarchy, as in Sparta, an oligarchy, or a democracy, as in Athens. However, the polis was more than a government or a political agency. As a total community, it served served to focus and integrate every dimension of the citizen's life. At the center of human loyalties and commitments, the polis objectify the values of Greek life. Although the lifestyles of particular polis might exhibit radical contrasts, as those between Spartan fascism and Athenian democracy, all Greeks saw a reciprocal relationship between the good person and the good society. No matter how virtue was defined, the good person could be such only in a society which permitted and encouraged excellence. As the integrative focus of community life, the healthy polis required citizens who were generally competent in the economic, political, social, military, and religious concerns of the community. This meant that the Greeks placed a priority on cultivating virtues common to all citizens rather than specialized or technical skills. As long as such a community of generalists was tenable, the polis was an effective unit of social and personal integration. 4. As the source of group norms, values, and behavior, the polis as an informal educational